is Remote Development Environments. My name is Šarić. I'm an owner of this LLC. It's a small LLC that I use for freelancing, not currently active or employing anybody. But if there is any intellectual property in these documents, they belong to this LLC. I'm a software developer working mostly with the Java language. I'm currently senior software engineer at a fintech corporation. And let's move the slide along. Yes, okay. Just yeah, that would be great. And we might also need extra ventilation. Yeah. Can we also increase the ventilation? There seems to be a lot of people here in a small space. If possible. I've started measuring the CO2 content in my home since I became a father. You should ventilate a lot, and there are a lot of people here. Okay, so a little bit of why I'm giving this talk. It's motivated by experiences from my freelance career. I think it was made relevant by this great shift to remote work. The Corona crisis did give a big push to remote work. Now, let's say that part is over and we have those calls to get back to the office. I still think remote work got a foothold that it did not completely lose when things normalized after the Corona crisis was declared officially over. So I still think remote work is very, very relevant. I do not work from the office at all. I have never been to the office of my employer thus far, but I've only been employed for 3 months. And so also, the third point needs to be stressed, vital for maintaining high security standards while hiring across the globe. So with this shift to remote work, you have, the company, the corporations have an opportunity to recruit from a greater pool of people than they could before. However, they are faced with logistical challenges and maintaining security standards, which are often enforced by law compliance. Okay, and the logistical challenges being, if I hire somebody halfway across the globe from me, I need to deliver equipment to that person and ensure it's not compromised on the way, and also should be able to monitor it while it's in his or her possession. Okay, so moving forward, these are the 3 points which motivated my talk. A little bit about me.
Because recording will be but if they go like, can we take it? Is that better? Yes. It's 3 buttons. No. I think it's okay. Just say
May I continue? Okay. So a little bit about me, what I've mentioned. I'm an open source and Linux enthusiast. Been working with Linux since high school, Windows 3 for over 5 years. Except a virtual machine that I have to use to pay taxes on my LLC because the Linux plugins for the Croatian tax system aren't very good. And my educational background is in political science. I don't have a CS degree. I did go for a bachelor at one point. I gave it up because of the demands of both working and studying. And, well, it seems to be that I was being hired in the places that we usually require a degree. I was being paid the same amount, so it didn't make much sense at that point. Would like to go for a PhD someday. I do not know how I will ever manage to have time for that.
Can you do a PhD without a bachelor and master's?
In the field, yes. This was one of the reasons why they instituted the Bologna process, I think, to enable this type of mobility. Also, professional work experience is often counted. So these are my social accounts where you can reach me. My LinkedIn, GitHub, Twitter, and blog. This is not really active. My blog still houses the articles I've written. I haven't contributed anything new in the last couple of months. I would like to do that. I think I'm mostly active on LinkedIn currently. And right now the focus is on workplace ergonomics and supplements to help you maintain your work-life balance. since I am a father of 2 kids, very small, and that's something I need to do. So the lecture plan for today, introduce the concept of the remote development environment, talk about remote IDEs, which are something separate but necessary, which help us make this a workable whole, and then talk about paid software as a service solutions, fast solutions, and of course you have this cleavage of self-hosted and ready-made cloud, right? So there's a mix here. It's not just open source proprietary. There's also where you run it. And conclusions and questions in the end. Okay, so remote development environments and IDEs. What are the advantages here? Why would we want to use them? So we want to give our development team an environment that is pre-configured both per project and per team. So here we're talking about the architectural standards and practices that a corporation would have, or a company, as to what tools you should be using, code style, CI practices, whatever. These can be packaged easily. As you see, we'll be working with Docker files, and you can simply keep a list of dependencies that you need in your Docker file for proper development. You can also do stuff like local linting, not just in the CI pipeline, and automate the dumb stuff over which people often fight because there is not a clear consensus. But people continue fighting for a long time. Okay, you can of course offer scalable resources. So this should be a strong point if you're hiring people around the globe. And especially if you're doing something like microservice development, you'll need, I don't know, 16 cores, 64 gigabytes of RAM, maybe sometimes. Giving them a remote development environment gives you something which you can easily scale. You don't have to deliver new hardware to the person that's working in that position. It's accessible from anywhere in a secure manner. So we're talking about, you will be using the standard now strong security tools available to us, like two-factor authentication, centralized authentication management, LDAP, and you can combine that with these tools to make sure it is secure. Easy onboarding, easy standard enforcement. So what happens if you're a developer in a new company? You'll be spending 2, 3, maybe 6 months learning from a colleague who will be your onboarding buddy. This is how we do things around here. These are the tools that we use. These are the things you shouldn't do, but we actually do here. And these are the things you should do, but you can't do here. Type of stuff. And that's a lot of wasted energy here. You should be able to have better governance in the software sense and have easier onboarding using these types of tools. But it does take effort. You need to actually then make these policies and create those environments, or create those environment blueprints. So more about the driving forces here. The remote workforce, security constraints, and uneven skill level in all relevant languages. We've talked a little bit about the first 2 points. What about the third point? This was made relevant even before the shift to remote work with the shift to microservice architecture. As you know, each microservice could be written in a different language. I really think we should somehow increase the ventilation in here. That is bad.
I can open, but I will ask to step before.
Okay, well, anyway, so the microservice architectural style, each service can be written theoretically in any programming language you want to. This gives you the ability to hire, again, from a wider pool of candidates, because you can choose from a wide range of programming languages. However, these people will, at one point, stop working on that project, work on another project, or work on several projects at the same time, and they won't be evenly skilled in all the languages which are used in all of these projects. Again, using these types of tools, you have prepackaged code standards, linting automation, which can help them which can help them work more easily in a language that they're not as familiar with. So how do we use them? The standard way of operating: SSH connections, remote tunnels, and these tools will offer this out of the box. Even if you're doing a self-hosted solution, you can use the vendor's infrastructure to provide an entry point, a tunnel. Of course, if you're a corporation, you will be doing everything yourself. But the standard solution is you have a remote tunnel and you can SSH into it from the public internet with additional authentication methods as needed. And so remote IDEs here, different from remote development environments, should be noted. These are the same things you use today, even if you're not using a remote development environment, you're using an IDE, right? JetBrains, Visual Studio Code, whatever. Remote IDEs are slightly different. They have a client and a server component, and you can have the IntelliSense and the code completion stuff, the heavy lifting, be dedicated on the server component, or you can do away with that and have a lighter editor style. You may also find them in a browser version, which completely eliminates the need to install software on your laptop. And some remote IDEs listed here would be Visual Studio Code, JetBrains products, multiple, and JetBrains Fleet, which I'm highlighting here as a remote first IDE, which is also built around the client-server architectural style. Yes, okay, so let's move forward. Yes, okay, so JetBrains Fleet was developed from the start as a remote IDE. It offers free public tunneling. As mentioned, that means if you deploy it on your remote server, your remote environment, once it starts up, it will use the JetBrains infrastructure to open a public a public address on the internet from which you can access that environment. And it's Java focused. So we have Visual Studio Code as the alternative here, and it's also free. Fleet is currently free as far as I know too. However, it's not a Java first IDE. It does have plugins to help it work with Java, and it's very lightweight. So that's great for connecting to a machine and editing configuration. If you want the IntelliSense that you're used to with Java, and why, which is why people like these strong type compiled languages, Fleet would be a better option. It can also do a mode without the IntelliSense, which is less resource intensive, but it can also offer more. Okay, before I move on to this part, what else to mention? So we talked a little bit about Visual Studio Code. As you know, it has its browser flavor, so you can have Visual Studio Code also deployed as a browser application very easily. The JetBrains IDEs all offer remote tunneling capabilities, maybe not as polished, but that's something that they're working on, I guess, in a modularized way. So once a breakthrough is happening on one product, it will very easily be spread out to all the other products. That's the way they work. Okay, and of course, for those people, well, this is the Java community, but for those people not working that heavily with Java, I'm sure you've explored Visual Studio Code and it has its strengths. Okay, so the paid SaaS offerings are here. They give us ease of use, stability, documentation that's well maintained. And I'd mention two here, which would be GitHub Codespaces and Coder.com. So GitHub Codespaces would be a relatively new offering from GitHub that's enabling you to raise a remote development environment through code defined in your project on GitHub, which can be an open source project, it can be a private project, it can be corporate, or it can be personal. So you could have a Codespaces file in your project, which defines basically like a Docker file, with maybe some additions possible, would define some type of Linux environment, usually that lists the dependencies that you need to do proper development. And you can use the GitHub web interface to spin up this code space and then connect to it remotely with your IDE or strictly through the terminal using SSH. And it's worth to mention that both GitHub Codespaces and Coder.com offer plugins for your IDEs to make work with them easier. Some things I have tried and I have found not ready would be Gitpod and DevPod, and I won't go too much into them. If that has changed since the last time I spoke about this, I apologize. Maybe someone else can do a presentation on those two products. Okay, this might be a good point to do an actual demo and show how these two look like. So to do that, I'm going to need to sit here. Would you mind maybe changing position? Yes. Okay, so I need to share the other screen. But this is not mirrored. Can we change this to mirror the screen that I see on my laptop in an easy way?
I have no idea. But you somehow.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a mirror. Is that from the laptop? That is configuration of the laptop. Yeah. You know, you go to the screen and there is like mirror or it's clever.
Oh, I should configure this here.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, but it only sees two displays. Okay. All right. Apply. Okay. Now okay. Let's see. We're getting the same thing though on all three. Okay. All right. Okay, so what do we see here? That's the GitHub web page, web interface. Here is a sample project that I did for Java Code for a different topic I present there called the Smart Garden. Is this written in Java to keep the things topical? I think yes. Okay, so this is a public repository. Things are a little bit simpler to configure. As I said, you could also do this for a private project or for a corporate project if you're using GitHub Enterprise. Okay, so this is the Codespaces area on GitHub. I don't have a file prepared for this repository, so I'll use something generic. However, it was also possible to create a configuration file within the repository that you'll be developing, which defines the code space. So what does this mean? Why is this useful? Every developer that comes onto the project will simply check it out, spin up a new environment, and get the exact same copy of the environment that you're using. If you need to make changes, they will be made for the whole team. Okay, undergoing maintenance. I guess not our problem. Right, no, wait. UTC Friday. Oh, no, 25th, 20th. Yeah, should not be our problem. Okay. So in this generic starter screen, we'll basically select the repository. In this case, the one that I showed previously. We're selecting the branch, a region, and so here are the offered machine types. And this is the point I'm talking about in terms of scalability. If you're running a more intensive project and you need to be able to run it locally, you can easily scale up. You don't have to ship a newer or faster laptop. So what's happening here? The environment is being prepared. We're taking to a web version of Visual Studio Code that GitHub already offers. You can just press the dot in any repository and you'll get this. However, this is different because it has a full virtual machine, a full environment behind it, which means you have a terminal that, and you can actually execute software. You can't do that on the version without Codespaces. So there are things which I'm sure you've encountered before. Here, for configuration like forwarding the port, you want to open. So let's say you're doing development of a front-end application, you want to forward a port, or you want to test out the REST API that you're developing. Again, you need to expose it somehow to yourself locally so you can run your tests. Well, as we saw in the previous screen, you can select a region. So this would be, I mean, GitHub is owned by Microsoft. I'm assuming it's an Azure machine somewhere in Europe.
Is there volume pricing or?
I haven't looked too much into that. GitHub has an enterprise offering, which is for corporations. So Codespaces are a part of their offer. So yeah, that would be my answer.
I don't know much about Visual Studio Code, but I'm just wondering, is the tooling that you have on this similar to Studio Code is they're both Microsoft and
this is a flavor of Visual Studio Code, and you can install all the plugins you would normally install. And if you're using Microsoft to store your plugin configuration, it will get picked up, and all the plugins will be present here.
you spin up environment, yes?
Okay.
How is it configurable? You like 5 is the config?
Yes, what I've mentioned. The most common method is to have a Docker file with maybe some additional configuration files like a Terraform file if necessary. Usually a Docker file is more than enough. You don't need to change the other stuff. Because you can select the resources on the previous screen graphically, how many cores, RAM.
Yeah. But for example, if I want to install
that would be in a Docker file, yes. You want a specific flavor of and version of the JDK, you want some other Linux dependencies you might need, yes, you would specify that in the Docker file. Okay.
It's basically the same as locally environments.
Yes. Yes, there is no standardized approach, but a lot of companies will use Docker to set up a local environment. And you have also, I know in the world of TypeScript, React, JavaScript, the dev containers are very popular, and that's reasonable. They solve some issues for the development teams. And you also define them using a Docker file. Okay, I'm gonna need a moment. But this wouldn't be my default IDE to work on a Java project either way. I would open something like JetBrains IDEA. And then I could use an integrated plugin that GitHub made for connecting to Codespaces easily. Okay, that's not the project I wanted. Wait, there might be a button here. Okay, let's see. Maybe I have an easy link here. No, that's just going to open up the current IDE. I should have uninstalled that. Okay. Please bear with me here. I'm going to open a new empty project and try to connect from there. Fortunately, things were kind of rushed, and I did manage to set up as well as I'd hoped. Okay. And also, this version of IDEA is not current, so I might not be able to get that plugin here. In which case, best to move forward.
Adding the plugin and then connect to that remote environment created in the Git.
Yes.
Case or whatever.
We could try connecting with Fleet. That would be easier. If we can run their script on the terminal there. So
Just make you aware that
20 minutes remaining. All right, then maybe it's best to move forward.
But that plugin is only available with the latest IntelliJ version.
I'm not sure. What I've noticed is it's usually best to update. I try to stay up to date. This is my old freelancing laptop. I haven't used it in a while. That was my responsibility. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to prepare that well due to the issues of getting here from Spain. And so, yeah, my apologies. Mm-hmm. All right. This is the best I can show currently in a nutshell. However, again, if you prepare for this, if it's a company policy, it will work much smoother. And I think for open source projects, GitHub does give some of this for free, especially if it's a popular project. So I think it's also a good idea, might be a good idea for open source, depending on whether or not it's a resource intensive project, but also because it's easy to set up the configuration when people want to contribute to the project, right?
comparison to setting up a local environment and have the code running. You were trying to connect JetBrains IDE with this using a plugin, right? So, but why would one prefer to use this model over a local?
Well, what I've talked about before in this current market where you have a lot more remote workers, if it's a resource-intensive project, one of the points would be it's harder to ship high-end hardware to people working around the globe, unless you have subsidiaries in all of these places where you're hiring. So that's one point. The other is security constraints could be followed more easily, and again, the IntelliJ example is not as good because it uses the local client, which is heavy. Fleet would be a better example, or Visual Studio Code. But the idea is you're using very little local resources. The remote environment is doing most of the work. And also, by using the Docker file, you can prepackage all of the, let's say, well, tools that will enforce code style, linters, other tools which automate checks on code quality and might be specific to your project to an extent, specific to your team to an extent, or specific to the whole company.
This workspace comes with
No, if you are a company, you will need to actually institute your policies. So you understand which tools you should use, you should not use, what are the practices that your development teams are using. You would write the configuration files once. However, the people using it would immediately, this would take effect immediately, and would also be distributed automatically to every member of the team, including new members. So there will be no need, or there will be a need, but there will be less of a need for the onboarding buddy to explain some things like, we use this specific tool for that. Here's a guide on how to set up the Docker backend. We use blah, 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 because this would be offloaded to the cloud. There are multiple vendors that offer this. Well, I'm not sure about Bitbucket. Do they have a remote environment offering?
Just the code.
Yes. Okay. This is separate from the code repo as such. So you would put the configuration in the code repo, but in addition to storing the configuration, you would actually offer them virtual machines to execute that configuration and give you a machine with X cores, RAM, hard disk space, or SSD space. So your laptop could be a very low-powered machine, and it could still run the code effectively, because it's just like a remote viewing terminal, basically.
What's comparison? So in terms of SSD, like would it be 512 or something?
Yeah. So I don't think I could offer any type of numbers here. That would be vendor specific, market specific at the time. Probably if you're a bigger company, you could get a discount.
But roughly, as compared to physical hardware versus a VM, multiple.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's economy of scale. You can purchase a data center, and it's like basically giving somebody a part of the SSD on the data center, a part of number of cores from the data center. That's all economy of scale.
But basically, if you run your app, it runs in the data center when you see your results locally. You have IntelliJ, right?
Yes.
And the answer is also in the question. To say what is the advantage of guys setting up local environment. You don't have to set up a local environment. Because someone is doing this once, and then you can propagate it through the whole company. So normal onboarding experiences, you spend like a week. Depends where you work. Week is pretty good. So you have to set up your environment. Yes, here day one, bam, you have it.
But would that be also hindering the learn it?
You can argue that.
Yeah, you'd be happy to do without that, but how much of the self-learning can be done remotely is probably debatable. You still need someone to handle.
No, of course. This isn't, people will be working in isolation from one another. I mean, all of these tools have gotten better, I think, since remote work came at helping us work at long distances with other people, not isolating ourselves and working without contact with anybody.
So these tools give you flexibility in terms of like what's being used to spin up the VMs. So if you want to do that like on-prem or like on AWS
Yes.
or something else.
Yes. So Codespaces, no. That's, I think, a GitHub offering, exclusively hosted by GitHub.
Let's.
Yes. Okay, I can go back to the presentation and I'll change the style of display.
More questions, run paper.
Okay, let's see what happens. Yeah, something. Okay. Where is my presentation? I can close this probably. Shouldn't have done that quickly. Okay. All right. Coder.com is similar. I would also need to display that here. Maybe. So, what are the differences? You mentioned self-hosted. Thank you. That's a great intro. Coder.com offers a cloud offering like GitHub Codespaces. It also offers the ability to self-host, and the basic setup is completely fast, so you can run it forever without, for free. But you won't have some advanced features like role access, for example. But you'll still be able to define Docker files in your projects, use them as templates for spinning up. So the core functionality will be here. You will need to pay if you want the corporate security editions. So as I said, the base product is fast. You can find their project on GitHub. There are instructions how to spin it up easily. You can test them locally. I ran this on a Raspberry Pi, not as good, Raspberry Pi 4. I also ran it on an Ampere 32-core server, much better, of course. Just running Ubuntu server, I think 22 probably. And so all of these can be, this one and one I'll show later are like pull a script, set it up, should work out of the box. You will get the full interface, create an admin account, right? However, if you want LDAP, role access, RBAC, you need to pay for the proprietary version. So I would really encourage you to check this out. If you have a machine somewhere and you can rent machines cheaply for as your personal labs these days, spin it up. It's fun. But again, this is from the guy that has the Raspberry Pis and the Ampere server at home. And Jellyfin too. I set up Jellyfin finally with two-factor authentication. Google Duo, no Duo, the US Duo. Okay, so moving forward. The purely fast solutions, again, the base product from coder.com. As I mentioned, I don't think DevPod is quite ready, but it has a self-hosted flavor. And so what if you want to go completely and roll your own solution? You can take a look at what they're doing. It's all open source. It's not that complicated, but I mean, you should use somebody else's solution because it saves time, right? And they've already made and fixed some mistakes, which you are yet to make. So one of the options would be using Docker plus Fleet or Kubernetes plus Fleet. What are your challenges? You need to set up tunneling the public internet or some way for your employees to access it could be just a VPN. I mean, for my own small home lab purposes, I use WireGuard. It's perfectly fine. And once I'm in WireGuard, I see my whole internal network, right? I don't need to worry about exposing something publicly. However, well, we'll not get into that. Okay, and this should probably be dropped from the list. JetBrains Space, I think they've halted development on this project. This was their product similar to coder.com and GitHub Codespaces in that it offered both a cloud and a self-hosted variant where you have the Git repository like GitHub plus the remote environments and, I don't know, a chat app and some basic project management functionality. So this project has, I think, been halted and reduced in scope to something else. But you can still find that software online if you want to play with it. It's also runnable for Kubernetes on a server, and then you get it set up. I was part of the beta there. I signed up. I mean, why not? Probably the reasons for failure are because there are already a lot of established names in this space, and people won't give up their confidence in Jira to work in your software. They're pretty comfortable with it, and they are good products. Same as how people drop Bitbucket, even though it's made by Atlassian, because it's not a very good product. Okay. Comments and questions?
And have you ever heard about, I don't know the name, but from Boomi, from Eclipse Foundation? There is like web-based.
No, somebody quizzed me on that when I came here. I have not. I will check that out. This needs to be updated.
I don't remember the name, but definitely it's quite active project.
If somebody knows the exact name, please chime in. I'll try to research that on my own. Any other comments or questions?
kind of got a weird question about Fleet actually. About a year or so back, I was playing around with it, not as a remote IDE, but see what it was like, and compare it to LJ. And it had a thing where I can't remember what it's called. It would use your local IntelliJ to do certain work on the thing.
Yes,
is that still a thing?
the gateway. You're talking about the gateway.
If that all happens on the server, you don't need to worry about it.
What I think, yes, I've noticed that before. What I think happened was basically Gateway was part of IntelliJ, and then they just separated out that as a separate project. They're just modularizing everything. And you can see, if you compare their products, compare IntelliJ IDEA with PyCharm or with another, you see it's built from the same building blocks, just specialized for that use case. So I think that's what happened with the Gateway here. Initially, Fleet maybe depended on IntelliJ. It does not now in any way.
The underlying engine is still
yes, that would be the backend. Yes, the backend part of Fleet.
LJ doesn't IntelliSense on the local side because it's probably the index of the local stuff, which is quite fun.
Yes.
They're delayed, so if you do it over the internet, you copy a massive index, it's going to be out of sync. But it tries to do that. But I've never found it actually
I don't know. I've found Fleet workable in the latest versions. However, you'd need, you would need in the organization to stand behind it. I don't know. Maybe, probably, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's pushing on Fleet, like if there's a major corporation or company using Fleet at this point.
What sort of plugins does it use all the LJ plugins? Or does it have its own?
It kind of like.
Yeah, but I mean, you can actually say, I want to use this LJ plugin.
Yeah.
And it will. It
applies on
works
server,
with
the server.
I'm pretty sure when I looked at it, it had its own plugin.
Yeah. No, they fixed that.
Thank you.
That ID is called Eclipse Chat.
Chat.
CHE.
Oh, Che.
CHE.
CHE. Is that an acronym? Like a.
CHE.
Is there a meaning behind that?
I don't know. I just checked the name.
It's like Shay at home. Shay Brew.
Oh, like French. Yes.
Like as an engineer, we unique space like this. But my ex-salary was get this idea.
Yes.
If I had known space,
I have worked with a client that used GitHub as their, so they use GitHub Enterprise. It was a very nice experience. They care a lot about developer experience at GitHub. I agree with their marketing on that point. And Codespaces kind of rolls together naturally with that. And when I actually encountered Coder for the first time, I was working for an external corporation, a US corporation, that had strong security requirements. What ended up happening was I would connect to their remote machine in the US using Citrix, which is like a VNC client or something like that, right? It was terrible, right? Yes.
I really like your idea about use this. For example, would save me a lot of time with the environment. Like, oh, I want to run this. How should I do it here? Yeah. So that's a really good idea.
A really good use case for this is what I've used it for is training. So basically giving everyone everything they need to get started with a product. And we did that at IBM where we just gave them an environment, Kubernetes, Maven, everything you need. They just log on into a portal and it basically gives them this IDE with everything. it was really good from that aspect. It just got everyone started really quickly, rather than making sure they got the right Maven version, right, making sure they've got the right JVM version. You know, it's just there you go, it all works. Have a play around. So pretty useful for that.
I will steal this. I do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Before we go, can we just gather for 1 minute over there?
One group photo.
Make a photo. It's not